This is Griggsville, Illinois. Zion's Camp March. The brethren stopped on the Illinois River, and this is just a short rundown of what happened. And I read the following. The brethren procured a shovel and a hoe, and removing the earth to the depth of about 1 foot, discovered the skeleton of a man almost entire, and between his ribs the stone point of a Lamanitish arrow, which evidently produced his death. Elder Burr Riggs retained the arrow. The contemplation of the scenery around produced peculiar sensations in our bosoms, and subsequently the visions of the past opened to my understanding by the Spirit of the Almighty. Now I'll stop right there. Would you not agree that Brother Joseph here is having a revelation? Yes, of course he is. I discovered that the person whose skeleton was before us was a white Lamanite, a large, thick-set man, and a man of God. His name was Zelph. He was a warrior and a chieftain under the great prophet Onondagas. Do we have an Onondagas in the Book of Mormon? No, we don't. It must be in the sealed portion. Who was known from the hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, to the Rocky Mountains. There's your horizontal layout. If Hill Cumorah is by the Eastern Sea, what body of water has to be called the Eastern Sea?
Lake Ontario.
That's correct, Lake Ontario. The curse was taken from Zelph, or at least in part. One of his thigh bones was broken by a stone flung from a sling while in battle years before his death. He was killed in battle by the arrow found among his ribs during the last great struggle of the Lamanites and Nephites. Now, there's a lot of information here we got to focus on. Number one, let's go back to the name of the great prophet Onondagas. Here we have a name, a word, Onondagas. If we find names that still are carried over and exist today in our time, we need to stop and take notice. Of the 6 nations of the Iroquois, we have a tribe called Onondaga. Onondagas. Onondaga. We also have a tribe called Oneida. And what do we find in the Book of Mormon? Alma takes the downtrodden of his day to a special hill where he nurtures them, and that hill is called Oneida. Again, Oneida as a tribe, Oneida as a hill. And what did Frank Kennedy tell us that his people were called in New York? They were called keepers of the stone, or keepers of the hill. And the hill is called what? The hill is called Oneida. They have a hill that they go to this day and do ceremony once every 7 years in the state of New York. That hill is called Oneida. Isn't that interesting? Now, let's look at here. Hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea to the Rocky Mountains. That gives us, again, an east-west picture to look upon for a Book of Mormon layout. Now, if you drop down to the bottom here, the footnote is also very key. History of the Church, 1948 edition. By the way, if you don't have the History of the Church, make sure you get the 1948 edition. And here's why. Volume 2, pages 79 through 80. Through error, the part of this quotation naming the hill Cumorah and specifying that Zelph died in the last great struggle was omitted in editions prior to 1948. It was, however, quoted correctly as written by the prophet, and here given in Volume 6 of the Times and Seasons of January 1, 1846, just months before his martyrdom. Isn't that interesting? Even in our day, we have problems with scribes omitting things that should not be omitted, but here it was omitted. So if you have a set and it's prior to 48, you're missing some good stuff. Go buy the 1948 edition. This is the Zelph Mound. This took me about 4 years to locate it, because in Illinois, obviously they don't call this the Zelph Mound. It was given a number when looked upon, and it took me quite a while through the archaeological data to find it. But I'll tell you a short story. It's kind of funny the way I found it. I knew the county where the brethren had crossed. I knew about the ferry crossing, and I'd found out that there was a big parcel of land that had been turned over to the state of Illinois, and it had been made a fish and game park. And so when I first went down there, I saw the house where the game warden stayed. And so I just got up my nerve, and I was very excited. I knew I was close. I really felt I was close to find the Zelph Mound. And so I went up and knocked on the door, and out comes this ranger with a typical, wide brim, what they call Smokey the Bear hat, and got his badge on. He's very formal looking, and, there I was. And in my excitement, I wasn't careful in what I said. And I said to this good man, I said, "I'm looking for the Zelph Mound. Can you help me?" And upon saying so, he really had a look of bewilderment on his face and a little bit of confusion, and he thought for a minute, And I thought, well, I already blew it. He thinks I'm a nut. He doesn't has any idea what I'm asking for. And then he looks at me and he said, young man, are you a Mormon? And I said, I am. He said, oh, you want the Mormon mound. He said, it's right over there. And so that's how I got to the Zelph mound. And I've been there many, many times, and I just love to go there. But this is the mound where they dug up Zelph. This is where the brethren camped for at least a day, maybe two, before they continued their march. And has a lot of history. But I want to tell you about just one more thing. The state of Illinois has done an archaeological dig on the Zelph mound, and they corroborated Joseph's vision. They put it into the Hopewell timeline. They said for sure it's at 250 A.D. plus or minus 100 years. Well, if you go minus, it puts it to 150 A.D., but if you go forward, it puts it to 350 A.D., and as Joseph said, one of the last great struggles of the Book of Mormon took place there. So Joseph was right on the money, and come along in the 1950s, the archaeologists from Illinois have confirmed Joseph's visionary statement. Isn't that interesting?